Welcome to the Streets and People podcast presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. Get Around Cabo Car Free is a volunteer community movement advocating for more transport options for people who can't drive in Caboolture and Morayfield in Queensland. In today's podcast, we'll be covering one of these three broad topics. It might be Road Rules 360, where we discuss Queensland's road rules, the legislation, the design for people walking, biking, in wheelchairs or on a scooter. It might be Not Everyone Drives, where we chat with people whose transport options don't include a car in a car-dependent society. And it might be People and Projects, where our conversations are with people working on a specific aspect of inclusive transportation. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, nighttime.
Hello.
This is Wendy Nash and
John Burrill.
We are going to talk about the road rules. I read out the short title and you read out the actual legislation and the understanding of the legislation.
That's right.
We are on the page which says www.qld.gov.au/safety/fines/cycling. So it's Queensland Government Road Rules. We're going through all the bike rules. One by one.
Yeah.
We do hope that you won't actually fall asleep, but maybe if it's that nighttime one, you're using us to put you to sleep. So just a heads up that, John, you've been retired from the TMR for how many years?
About 6 years now, 5-6 years at least.
Yep.
I lose track. I'm retired, you forget time.
I look forward to that day. You have a long-term interest in road rules and legislation, but you're not in anymore.
No, it's not my work. It was my work for about 20 years in the department. But since I retired, I've still kept up to date with the legislation, and any amendments and changes that come along, I'm always interested in them.
So just a heads up, we are not giving any advice of any kind. We are here to entertain and inform. If you have an issue that you would like to raise with your local person, or you get busted, don't come to us and say it's our fault, this is how it is. Don't do that.
We're not responsible.
We're all care and no responsibility. That's my line. All right. We've already done one section. We've done a couple of episodes of this. So this is actually part 3 now of the road rules legislation. And we're picking up where we dropped off from the last one. It's a big section. This is the general road rules. So this applies to drivers as well. And this is the part 2 of those second ones. What happens, like in the last episode, I read the short title, which is just a brief description, the section number it comes up to, so you can follow along if you're super enthusiastic, or maybe you're a budding police officer. I read out the fine. And John, you give a bit more background and context for what that could be.
Yes.
All right, so today we'll start with overtaking or riding past a vehicle turning and signalling left to the left of that vehicle. This is section 141, paragraph 2, and the fine on that one is 154.
Overtaking to the left of another vehicle.
Turning left. So you could, if they're turning right, well, that's different.
The whole rule is about, it provides an offence for overtaking to the left of the vehicle illegally. And there are some exceptions. This very specific offence that applies to cyclists, it's pretty obvious that as a cyclist, if you're cycling past to the left of a queue of stationary vehicles, you're perfectly okay doing that, even if they're signalling to the left. And in other words, if you can imagine a queue of traffic up to the traffic lights, lots of cars with a signal on to say that they're turning left, you can still pass them on the left.
As long as they're not turning.
And that's the critical point of this, is if they are actually in the process of turning and you are trying to overtake them as they turn, then you can get a ticket.
So it says, and signalling left. Now many motorists...
They have to be signalling and they have to be actually turning left in order for the offence to happen.
I don't like the term devil's advocate, because I always wonder, does the devil need any advocacy? I think the devil gets plenty of advocacy already. What's the opposite to the devil? The angels. The angel's advocate.
You're allowed to present a contrary view.
Thank you. If a driver is turning left,
Yes.
but is not signalling,
If they're not signalling, then you as a cyclist don't know that they're about to turn, so the offence wouldn't apply.
You might be dead.
Well, yes, of course, yeah. I mean, you might be knocked off your bike,
Yeah.
but in essence, that becomes far more the fault of the turning vehicle rather than the overtaking cyclist. The legislation uses overtaking or passing because there is a very specific definition of overtaking that isn't always fulfilled if you're a cyclist just riding along down the left-hand edge of the road, passing stationary vehicles. Overtaking and passing. If the car's not signalling, the rule wouldn't apply. You rely on an intercepting police officer to know all this, and without making any accusations.
We're very polite to everybody on this show.
I have to say that there's a lot of police officers that don't always know this minutiae within the rules.
Police officers get a huge workload. I've met the local highway patrol person who heads up. It does a huge region. When I introduced Get Around Cabo Car Free to him, just to say hello and who we are, he talked about how big the range is from the Sunshine Coast right down to the bottom end of Moreton Bay and in quite a bit and right to the coast. That's a huge area. They don't have a huge resourcing. It was pretty limited. They have to deal with like domestic violence. That police officers suspect domestic violence. They have to engage in that too.
They're busy folk.
They're busy folk. As the highway patrol person that I spoke with said, you come here to Caboolture to work. It's not a cushy job by any stretch. I have a lot of respect for the police officers. The police minister is actually my local, so at the networking events I meet quite a few police officers, and there is a lot of variability between the understanding of the police officers. I meet some and they're great, they totally get the issues with cycling, but then I'll get one who'll say, cyclists, they break all the road rules, they go through the traffic lights. And I've come to see that it's a little bit like the domestic violence issue. 50-50 at fault. Right, so you've got this big burly bloke who's angry and this scrawny little teenager. You tell me who's going to come off badly in that situation. Can you say 50-50? So
There's a power imbalance.
There is a total power imbalance. We are digressing. People are people. Sometimes they're police officers. Sometimes they're cyclists. I've turned into a raving cyclist at times. So I get it from all perspectives. I've also been a driver. I don't drive that much anymore. But people are people. And then sometimes there are also all these other parts in their lives. And different things make different people kind of nuts in life. All right. So the next one is overtaking a vehicle, turning and signalling right to the right of that vehicle, and that's section 142 paragraph 1, $216 if they're signalling right and you
overtake
on the right hand side. Well, that's a death wish if ever there was one.
Well, it is, isn't it? It's less common. The fine is higher for some reason, and often you won't find any rhyme or reason when it comes to the actual level of a lot of these fines. They go way back into history, and they've basically just been increased each year with CPI. If you try and work it out, you'll go nuts. There's no rhyme or reason. It is a higher fine, and it's fairly simple. If a car's signalling to make a right turn and in the process of making a right turn, then if you're a cyclist trying to overtake them on the right-hand side, then you're going to get a ticket for it.
Okay.
That's if you're still alive.
The next one is overtaking a vehicle with a do not overtake turning vehicle sign, that is turning and signalling left to the left of that vehicle, and that's section 143 paragraph 1. That's a fine of $216. And the next one is overtaking a vehicle with a do not overtake turning vehicle, that is turning and signalling right to the right of that vehicle, and that's section 143 paragraph 2, and that again is 216. Presumably that's the same as above.
It's a separate rule for heavy vehicles, heavy and long vehicles. From a cyclist perspective, there is no difference at all. The rules themselves, or that rule, section 143, has a lot more to it. but obviously it's not cited here because the rest of that rule is not really concerned with cycling. The rule basically gives a heavy or long vehicle more of a priority when they're trying to make a turn because they need the space. So even cars aren't allowed to overtake to the left or right of a turning long vehicle.
Now, we are just speaking about the road rules here in Queensland. We don't
Yes.
cover other jurisdictions in Australia. Okay, so next we're up to failing to maintain a safe distance while overtaking a vehicle. That's section 144 and $216.
All it's saying is that when you overtake another vehicle, you mustn't come too close to it. Like if you overtake a vehicle and you are so close that you're going to clash wing mirrors, it becomes an offence if you get too close. This rule applies if you're a cyclist overtaking another cyclist and you overtake them too closely to the point where you're so close that you end up causing them to swerve or wobble or come off the bike. It happens quite regularly where the overtaking cyclist is probably doing 40 kilometres an hour and the cyclist being overtaken is maybe only doing 10. That difference, the speed differential can really cause a lot of trauma to the overtaking person. It's an interesting rule. They're all interesting. I love them all.
Yeah, I must say, when you say that, it's an interesting, because often you'll go, oh, it's a very interesting rule. I'm sitting there going, I bet it is. Sorry, John.
Trust me. Trust me.
Your wife, you say that, she's like, oh gosh, he's talking the road right.
She loves me, my wife.
She
does
love
not
you.
love me much when I'm driving with her and we end up having a road rules discussion.
All right, so now we're up to the next one, which is increasing speed while being overtaken.
Yes,
now okay.
this
Section 145, and that's a $92 fine.
Yes.
So that's basically someone's starting to overtake you, and then you're a mean-spirited, I'm not going to be beaten kind of person,
That's it.
and
You
put your foot down, and then you make it difficult for the person to overtake,
Yes.
therefore increasing the chance of a collision because
Yes.
you're actually making it more likely for that
Absolutely.
person to
Absolutely.
collide.
The rule only applies if the overtaking vehicle is crossing a centre line. If it's basically a single lane road, in other words, one lane in each direction, if you cross the centre line to overtake and the person you're overtaking suddenly speeds up to prevent you from overtaking or safely, potentially at least putting you in danger of hitting an oncoming.
So if you've got two cyclists side by side and one is overtaking the other cyclist and one goes, oh, I'm not going to be beaten.
Yeah. But the cyclist that's trying to overtake has to be across on the wrong side of the road, if you like, across the centre line.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're both within the same space in the same lane, it's not an issue.
So does this apply to bike lanes as well? So say you've got a bike lane and someone's overtaking on a bike lane or on a shared path.
It depends on the width of the bicycle lane. If you're overtaking within the width of the bicycle lane, it could become an issue. No, but you see, the rule doesn't apply. It might come under a different rule because if you're trying to overtake in a situation where there's not enough space to overtake anyway, that will come under a different rule. We're talking about a situation where an overtaking vehicle, including a cyclist, tries to overtake and the vehicle being overtaken, whether it be a car or a bicycle, starts to speed up. If you're a cyclist, let's just say, for example, a car is trying to overtake you. They've crossed the centre line in order to try and overtake you, and you've decided instead of riding at 10 kilometres an hour, you're going to go 40. And you immediately start pedalling faster and faster and faster, preventing that vehicle, whether it be a car or a cyclist, from overtaking you safely, then you can get a ticket under this rule. I can imagine a situation where if it's a narrow road and it's a two-way road and you're a cyclist and you're sitting in the middle of the road and you're cycling slowly and another vehicle comes up and tries to overtake you and in doing so legitimately ends up on the right-hand side of the centre line and you suddenly speed up on your bicycle, preventing them from doing that overtaking manoeuvre, that can be quite a serious breach of the rules.
Okay, so next we're up to failing to drive, ride in a marked lane on a multi-lane road, section 146 Paragraph 1, fine on that, 123. Also, failing to drive, ride within a line of traffic on a road with 2 or more lines of traffic, and that's section 146.2, and that's 123.
Working out how this applies to cyclists, it's almost like, why is this rule included in the cyclist fines? Because I can't conceive of it being a problem for a cyclist. But basically what the rule is about is if you're driving in a multi-lane road, you're not allowed to drive with one wheel, say, of your vehicle, thinking about cars, in one lane and one wheel in another lane.
If you had a tricycle, technically that would fit.
Well, no, if you're a wider vehicle or a car, say, essentially what the rule is about is you're not allowed to straddle lanes. So you should be either in this lane or in this lane. You can't be in both. The reason why there's a difference, it starts to get a bit technical, but there's one rule for lanes, there's another rule for lines of traffic.
When it's a multi-lane road, if it's 2 on either side, like a common arterial, or a highway, like Morayfield Road, which is a pretty horrible place to be. There's sort of 3 or 4 on either side.
Multi-lane roads.
They're multi-lane roads. What's a line of traffic?
The difference is, if you can imagine, and there are a lot of them around in Queensland, especially in country Queensland, where you get a very wide road, but with no lane markings. So it's almost like a dual carriageway, but you just haven't got that line separating the 2 vehicles. What you have then is 2 lines of traffic.
Okay.
That's the only difference. If you can imagine 2 vehicles or 2 rows of cars or travelling along the road side by side as if they were in lanes, but there is no mark, no white line separating them.
Right, okay.
So that's all it is. But how does this apply to cyclists?
If you were sort of doing a zigzag across lanes, that would then fit. There's another legislation that we've done on that, which is hindering cars or slowing down, unnecessarily, being a nuisance on the road. Yeah. So that's a different one. So this is just rubbish.
It is, really. This is one of those where if you looked at the number of fines that were issued, it would be certainly single digits.
For the last 25 years. Yeah, okay.
They're just not issued because you can't shoehorn this offence to a situation where it would be relevant for a cyclist.
Yeah, okay.
You've got to have some width about you in order for this to actually happen.
Yeah. That sounds, crazy. All right, so the next one is crossing a continuous line dividing lanes on a multi-lane road, and that's section 147.1, and the fine is 123.
There's a lot of different types of lane markings, road markings, and refer to them as longitudinal lines that occur on roads. You can get centre lines, lane lines, edge lines, but this rule is specifically about a line that separates a lane. If it's a dotted line, obviously you can change lanes, so long as you're not failing to give way to anybody who's in the lane you're moving to, you're okay. If it's a solid line, in other words, a continuous white line that's separating the lanes, you're not allowed to cross, even if you're a bicycle.
Your centre line, that's the one that's in the middle of the road. Yep. And then your lane lines, they're generally stripy with some cat's eyes.
Sometimes continuous, sometimes solid.
Yep.
Then you've got edge lines.
And that's a solid.
Which is the left-hand side of the road, or even the right-hand side of the road. It's
both sides,
that marks the edge of the road, basically.
Yep.
They're the 3 main types of longitudinal line on the road.
Okay, failing to give way when changing lanes on a multi-lane road, section 148.1, fine on that, $464.
Yes.
Failing to give way when changing from one line of traffic to another, that's section 148.2, again, $464.
Yep.
Failing to give way while diverging within a marked lane, section 148A, and that's $464.
Fascinating. These are fairly common rules that would apply in a lot of different situations. And what it means is if you're diverging, then it's either moving to the left or moving to the right, then that vehicle is responsible to make sure that there's nobody else in the way.
So you get those mean-spirited codgers who are just going, I'm not going to let you in. Or, yes.
And they're committing an offence.
Causing
somebody else to give them.
Imagine how much the Queensland government revenue could get if you had people who were like, I would love to see...
Don't get me started on this, because this is so... We've had our little conversation about police, but for fear of being controversial...
understand of this already.
That's my sort of caveat on this. The police do not understand the giveaway rules. That's a simple fact.
Well,
Things might have changed as time has gone by, but certainly when I was in the department, police didn't understand giving way, because in their eyes, giving way meant there was a crash. If you've had a crash, then somebody has failed to give way, which is true. But there are literally thousands upon thousands upon thousands of situations that occur out there on the road where somebody fails to give way when they should have given way, and the police don't even see it as an offence.
Now, we're not giving police officers
We are actually. Sorry.
Look, and the other thing is that police officers did their training way back in, 1854, not quite that long time ago, but a long time ago, and legislation changes and public ideas change and understanding changes. This is a big reason why we're doing this podcast. It's just as useful for police officers, what we're doing, as it is for the general public, as it is for anybody else.
That's right.
Anything else to add?
Just one thing to pull out. The last one there, the giving way while moving within a single lane. I mean, that's very relevant to motorcyclists, but cyclists as well, because when you think about it, you very, very seldom, well, it's virtually impossible to get two cars within the space of one lane.
Yeah.
But you can often be in a situation where you are sharing a lane with another vehicle like a car.
Yeah.
And it is an offence to move within that lane, failing to give way to somebody else who is also in that lane. To be quite honest, it's more a situation where you could apply it to two cyclists riding within the space of a lane. Obviously, you're still required to give way. If you can imagine two cyclists within the space of a lane, if you're moving laterally, you can't just bump into somebody and get away with it. It's not going to happen. If you're the vehicle or the cyclist that's making a lateral movement and intending to bump into somebody else, then you're failing to give way to them.
So, next is failing to give way when lines of traffic are merging into a single line. So that's section 149, $464.
There's some wonderful diagrams that often get posted in main roads and Street Smart and RSEQ. This is something that comes up all the time. There's basically two types of merge. One is a merge where you're merging over a dotted line, and another is a situation where the road narrows and you're merging, but there is no line that you're crossing over. Now, in that situation, the giveaway rules are different in each. If you're crossing a line, you have to give way to the vehicle that's in the lane that you're moving to. If there's no line, then and it's a merge situation. If your vehicle is ahead of the vehicle behind you, doesn't matter whether it's on the right or the left, then it's that vehicle in front that has priority. Okay. And it applies to cycles as well.
Good luck. You're likely to be run over if you're with a driver. There's
not entitled to be run over.
Well, thank you for that notification.
Stop running over cyclists.
Oh gosh, I see some videos. It's just awful. We're not going to be going there. We might traumatize some people. We do apologise. We are here to entertain and inform and hopefully not terrorise you. Okay, disobeying an overhead lane control device, section 152. Paragraph 1, $278.
Overhead lane control device is something that you often see in our urban environment. It's basically a big sign hanging across the road, and there can be lots of different arrows and lights and flashing things, but this main reason for this rule is occasionally, again, it's difficult to see the relevance for cyclists on this because primarily this is to do with motorways.
Yeah, I was thinking that. Yeah. So I don't drive much, but motorway, obviously a bicyclist can't go onto the motorway.
No.
And where else do you get those over?
Well, I suppose you can get them.
I guess
in other places, but it's just very unusual.
Yeah.
You wouldn't usually get an overhead lane control device in other places. I mean, there might be urban dual carriageways which aren't motorways where you may find a cyclist is there. Primarily, what this rule is about is for the purposes of roadworks or a crash or whatever, the people in a control room somewhere have cameras on all of these situations and they can see if there is a crash happened and they can change those electronic overhead control toll symbols and put a red flashing cross, and that's an indication that you've got to get out that lane, which as you go on down, the next gantry will have a solid red cross, which means you are not allowed to be in that lane from this point onwards. So the flashing one means you've got to get yourself out of that lane, and at the point where it's a solid red cross, you have to be out of the lane by that point. And it's usually a parked car or broken down car or crash, all sorts of possibilities.
Not really relevant to cyclists.
Absolutely.
Okay.
What's it doing there?
What's it doing there? All right. Driving, riding on a safety zone or past a safety zone at an unsafe speed. And that's section 162, paragraph 1. And the fine on that's $185.
Well, this is something that is just so left field, you wouldn't believe it.
I mean, what's an unsafe speed? Any speed is an unsafe speed. I mean, technically, any speed is an unsafe speed.
Listen, I can tell you now, absolute certainty, this is a rule that is relevant in Victoria. It is not relevant in Queensland, even though it's there in our rules.
Oh.
It's one of the things that we've put in just for the sake of national consistency.
Which is no longer consistent.
Well, now I've said that, and I probably need to correct myself, because the Gold Coast now does have a tram system.
Okay.
This is to do with trams.
Ah.
So there may be a relevance for a situation on what they call it, the light rail through the Gold Coast. But it is effectively, for road rules purposes, it's a tram. And what a safety zone is an area where everybody's getting off the tram in the middle of the road. It's classed as a safety zone because obviously there are lots of pedestrians coming from the left or right hand side of the road in order to get to the tram stop, which is in the middle of the road. But you can see why it's mainly relevant in Victoria, because Melbourne has thousands of these things. And that's where the rule comes in.
I would love to have a light rail here. Anyway, that's another conversation. Anything to add?
You just got to slow down.
Yeah.
And there isn't even a specific speed limit. You just got to not ride too fast. And there you go. You're on your push bike. Don't be doing 50 k's on your push bike. That's the tram zone in the Gold Coast.
That is relevant, isn't it? Okay. Using a horn or similar warning device other than as permitted. Section 224, $92.
Isn't that a lovely one, hey? Obviously, primarily aimed at motor vehicles. If you're going along the road and, I don't know, you see a pretty woman walking down the road and you go, doot, 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 doot. Back in the day, that used to be appropriate. Definitely not appropriate now, and against the law.
It's never been appropriate. You wash your mouth now. It's so cute. That's a microaggression. That's called a sexist microaggression. You das ist verboten. You know, what are we doing here, John?
Not a good example. There are plenty of examples. Okay, you're just waving bye-bye to your grandma, and you drive away in your car, and you go, beep, beep. Oh, watch out, there's a ticket coming your way.
Funny with that. Cyclists, though, is that you get lots of drivers. They're like, nah. They'll just do anything. You have people screaming at you from their truck, you know.
That's true. That is covered by this rule. But the reason this rule is here in the list of bicycling rules is that the cyclist can get a ticket for using a horn inappropriately.
Because bicycles have got a bell, but some people have a horn as well, failing to give way to all other nature strip users when driving, riding on a nature strip. Section 289, paragraph 2, $361.
Yes. There's a pecking order on paths, nature strips and what have you. Riding, obviously, there's not many cars allowed to ride along the footpath. There are certain times where you are, if you're trying to access a road-related area. Certainly for motorcyclists in Brisbane City, there's a lot of times where you've got to ride along a footpath or a nature strip to get to the designated parking space for the motorbike. It's just establishing a pecking order. If you're doing that as a cyclist riding on the verge, you can get a ticket if you fail to give way to a pedestrian or some other road user in that area.
The next one is driving, riding on a traffic island, except in a roundabout. Section 290, $92.
Pretty self-explanatory if you're on a traffic island. And then again, and there are exceptions to this rule because there are times when cyclists can legitimately ride on a traffic island, but in most cases this would be offence. Again, I can't think of any situation where you would be riding along traffic island. So you're allowed to cross it, but if you're actually using it as part of the road, that's when it becomes an offence.
So the next one is driver rider involved in a crash failing to fulfil duties. This is a slightly different section. This isn't Queensland Road Rules. This is Transport Operations Road Use Management Act, Section 93, Paragraph 2, $309.
Yes. This used to be in the road rules actually, but it's been taken out. Without going into lots of detail, an act is what they call primary legislation. The road rules and lots of other legislation that we discuss is what they call subordinate legislation, which is lower level offences. Now, this has been taken up a notch, if you like, and put into the Act because it's really quite serious, and it's to do with hit and run riders. If you have a crash and you don't stop and give your details, there's a whole list of things that you must do if you have a crash. And people who fail to do that, if you're a cyclist, you have a crash and just flee the scene, then there's your fine if you get caught.
Yeah, and the next one is also in the same section. It's driver rider involved in a crash failing to give particulars to police if required.
Yes, that's
and
right.
so that's Transport Operations Road Use Management Act, Section 93, Paragraph 4, $464. So that's, you have to hand over your details if the police request in that situation.
Yes.
Yeah. Anything to add on that?
No, we could go into all sorts of detail on it, but it's not necessary. It's a driver and a rider's responsibility to know what to do in the event of a crash. So probably worth looking it up, doing a web search, because you've got to exchange insurance details, names and addresses and all that business to the other person and to the police.
All right, just to confirm, we're here to entertain and inform. We are not giving advice. So what you do, if you have a collision, this is your responsibility.
Absolutely.
You have to give your ID over when you do that. And people do hit cyclists and pedestrians and do keep driving. Yeah, that's a bad one. All right, this is the last one for today. Driver, rider, drinking liquor while driving or riding. We're back to the road rules, and that's section 300A, and that's $464.
Most of the drink driving legislation is in the Act, but this little one here is actually still in the road rules. Must say I'm surprised it is still here, because I know even when I was there was talk about transferring it to the Act. But what it is literally is the act of drinking while you are driving.
Okay.
So if you're riding your bicycle and you've got your
tinny in one hand,
tinny in one hand, and you're sort of wobbling down the road, you might not even be drunk. You might not even be over the limit. But if you are physically drinking beer or wine or whatever it is you've got in your hand while you are riding your bicycle, there's a $464 fine.
And it should be drinking liquor or take another substance, because somebody could have a marijuana joint or something like that. That's not covered under that legislation. We are not advocating risky behaviour or illegal behaviour. Do not do that. It's a really bad idea anyway, because if you're stoned and don't do that. It's such a bad idea. All right, John, we're going to wrap it up. We have rabbited on too long today.
We've had fun.
We've had fun. Yep, we cracked through it all. But we hope you will listen to the next one. We're up to level crossings in our next episode.
Wow. Level crossings. Bring it on.
Whoa. All right, that's a wrap. Let's call it a day. Thanks very much for listening to us.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for enjoying Streets and People, presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. We publish our podcast regularly at the usual places and on our website, where you can find out more about us. getaroundcabocarfree.com.au. That's www.getaround, get around, that's pretty straightforward. Cabo, C-A-B-O, that's short for Caboolture. Car Free, C-A-R-F-R-E-E. There's no hyphen in that. .com.au. Our theme music is The Thief on AM Sound, which is just like our cars on our streets, always stealing the space. So let's stop that thief.